In the midst of a fierce battle, several figures desperately and abruptly scrambled out into the open like rats fleeing a sinking ship. Navy SEALs and Marines lunged over the edge of a trench with no regard for cover or self-preservation as they faced two talking medium machine guns. Bodies flew in all directions as operators and jarheads alike chose the lesser of two evils, taking their chances with friendly fire over whatever magical garbage was about to detonate below. They managed to clear the edge just in time before a massive concussive blast erupted from the trench system. The explosion was unlike any conventional explosives they were used to. This was something entirely different. The shockwave hit like a freight train, upending the earthen walls and tossing bodies several feet before slamming them back to the ground. The half-finished fortification's entrance simply ceased to exist. The heavy door and drapes of cloth covering it had been completely obliterated in an instant as exaggerated flames roared up from the depths like some supernatural geyser. When Finch hit the ground, he hit it hard, taking the impact with his shoulder. But the lance corporal didn't have time to get his bearings as he desperately rolled away from the strange, magical flames that licked out of the trench, seemingly reaching out with tendrils to anyone or anything with malevolent intent. Each roll sent jolts of pain through his body, but the alternative of getting touched by those unnatural flames wasn't worth considering. After putting a few precious feet between himself and the inferno, he pressed himself as flat against the ground as possible, trying to become one with the dirt because he knew what was coming next. And right on cue, the real terror began. Horrifying snaps and whizzes of incoming fire echoed all around them as some private somewhere decided now was the perfect time to yank back on the trigger of an M240 and hold it down. The machine gun's cyclic rate tore through shrubs, snapped branches, and sent tracers streaking overhead in deadly red lines that looked deceptively beautiful until you heard the supersonic cracks that accompanied them. Cease fire. Cease fucking fire. Finch started screaming, but their voice was drowned out by the constant hammering of the 240 and the sharp reports of M27s joining in. Dirt kicked up in little geysers all around Finch's rounds impacted way too damn close for comfort. To make matters worse, he could still feel the heat from those strange flames lashing around near his back. The smell of the acrid smoke mixed with whatever fantastical crap was roaring in the trench made his nose burn, but Finch didn't dare move. Moving meant getting up. Getting up meant getting a face full of 7.62 or 5.56. Friendlies, friendlies, friendlies in the open. Ray's was roaring at the top of his lungs into his radio, but it was like shouting into a hurricane. One of the SEALs had somehow managed to find a shallow depression in the ground just before a burst of machine gun fire peppered his position. The man tightened into a ball to make the smallest target possible, while furiously working his radio, trying to get some Ioniania on the net to call off the turkey shoot they'd found themselves in. His body was pressed so flat against the earth that he looked like he was trying to dig through it with pure willpower alone. Newman was a few meters to Finch's left, and even in this clusterfuck, the Marine had found time to string together an impressive chain of profanity that questioned the parentage, intelligence, and sexual preferences of whoever was behind that 240. His voice carried between bursts of fire, "A fucking boot, motherfuckers. I swear to fucking Goda." Just as Newman lamented his fate, another explosion rocked the trench system, adding insult to injury. This one sent a pillar of flaming tendrils higher, lapping at the edges as if searching for anyone or anything just feet away from the Marines and SEALs. Heat washed over them in waves, and the senior private could feel his exposed skin starting to singe in a way that definitely wasn't natural. Whatever those imperial assholes had thrown at them, it sure as shit wasn't anything like grenades. Eventually, after a full 15 seconds of firing, someone moved down the line of supporting Marines and essentially smacked the machine gunner in the head while yelling for them to cease fire. The suppressive fire finally slackened, whether because someone had gained control of the situation or the squad providing fire support realized they were lighting up their own men. But the damage was already done. The Potley crew being fired upon didn't bother coming out of their hidey holes even as another explosive rocked the entrance of the bunker system. No one wanted to risk standing up and getting tagged by some idiot not paying attention. "Everyone still breathing?" One of the SEAL's voices cut through the sudden lull. though nobody dared to raise their heads to do a visual check. "I think I'm alive," Pham called out, his voice muffled by the dirt he was eating as he pat himself down. "Still here?" Finch managed to croak, finally daring to turn his head slightly to assess the situation. The trench they'd just evacuated was now a blazing hellscape. Strange flames flickered and danced along the edges, occasionally belching up like some kind of demonic heartburn. Whatever entrance that this fortification had was now thoroughly fucked, which was probably good news in the grand scheme of things. He doubted anyone would be running out of there, but it didn't make their current position any less precarious. They were caught out in the open between a magical inferno and trigger-happy allies, with no good options for movement. The only silver lining was that the doorway they wanted to use had collapsed, but there were still assholes lurking inside that thing. Both Rays and the leader of this small group of SEALs were furiously barking into their headsets, trying to coordinate with support elements and let them know friendlies were about to stand up. The radio traffic was a clusterfuck of overlapping transmissions between those that were engaged, casualty call-out and troop movements, but the message was clear: hold your fucking fire. Friendlies are standing up. I say again, friendlies are standing up. Rays practically screamed into his mic, his voice hoarse from all the yelling. After what felt like an eternity, one of the braver souls of the small squad of SEALs finally decided to test fate. The operator slowly and carefully rose from the shrubbery with his hands spread wide to show he wasn't a threat. Every muscle in his body had tensed up as if waiting for that telltale crack of a rifle that would signal some asshole hadn't gotten the message. But nothing came. No rounds, no tracers, no sudden impact that would send him spiraling back to the dirt. "Well, shit," the SEAL muttered, brushing dirt off his kit. "Guess they finally figured out how to use their safeties." That was all the encouragement everyone else needed as Marines and SEALs alike began to cautiously stand up. Each man did a quick check to make sure all their parts were still attached and they hadn't taken a bullet. The relief was palpable but short-lived. They were still close to an enemy dugout. "Watch that fucking entrance," one of the SEALs barked, pointing at the still smoldering hole they'd evacuated from. Closest to the entrance, Finch and Newman instinctively took up positions overlooking the trench with their weapons trained on the shattered opening. The unnatural flames were still flickering around the edges, but they were beginning to die down in an uncomfortable, writhing, and twisting manner. It was as if the fire were living creatures gasping for air. The entrance itself was mostly caved in from the blast. Chunks of stone and earth had collapsed inward, creating a partial blockade. However, there was still room enough for people to squeeze through if they were determined enough. And if there was one thing Finch had learned about these magic-using assholes after the past few minutes, it was that they were nothing if not determined. "Dylan," the SEAL's squad leader's voice boomed across the devastation. "Dylan, get your ass up here and bring the heavy breacher." He growled angrily into his microphone before the operator turned to the Marines. "We're gonna need more bodies for this bitch. Whatever's down there, it's dug in deep." Ray's hand was already moving to his push to talk. When he nodded, "Roger that," he replied before keying his mic. "Be advised, we've stumbled upon a hardened position with hostiles still inside. Break targets is partially collapsed." Behind them, the SEALs were running their own radio, coordinating with their platoon and trying to set up a proper breach while Finch and Newman kept watch over the fortification. The Lance Corporal's eyes darted back and forth between the entrance and his sector, trying to monitor everything at once. The flames were definitely dying now, flickering and writhing as if they were suffocating. It was strange. It looked as if it was flailing in desperation like drowning swimmers. Watching fire act as if it was alive was unsettling as hell. But then something else caught Finch's notice. Through the dust and dying flames, a head poked through the rubble. For a frozen moment, the figure of a dark-skinned elf with wide, startled eyes and the two Marines just stared at each other. Time seemed to stretch like taffy as three sets of eyes just stood there in mutual recognition of what was about to happen before muscle memory kicked in. "They're still alive in there," Newman and Finch shouted in perfect unison, their rifles snapping up and firing their weapons at the gap. The elf's head disappeared so fast it might have teleported, yanking back just as the first rounds sparked off the stone where his face had been a millisecond before. Both Marines kept firing, trying to plug the hole with as much lead as possible, chewing into the rubble and sending chips of stone flying everywhere. "Newman, frag that bitch!" Finch yelled as training took over. Finch maintained overwatch on the hole, almost tunnel visioning to ensure no other curious head decided to pop out. Newman, on the other hand, was already moving as one hand shoved itself into a pouch for a grenade while the other kept his rifle up. Behind them, the SEALs and Rays were adjusting their radio calls and updating each other's commands on the situation. "Frag out!" Newman shouted as he ran to the entrance, yanking the pin and tossing the grenade through the opening. Just after tossing it in, the private then scampered over the hump of the destroyed entrance and stood on the opposite side of the trench, pointing his weapon down into it. The dulled explosion thundered from below, sending another gout of dust and debris up through the gap. Meanwhile, Finch held his position, just daring some idiot to peek out one more time. But he started to get distracted by the sound of boots stomping on shrubbery and branches snapping, echoing over the gunfire and explosions that peppered the area. Turning his head quickly, the lance corporal caught sight of more SEALs and what looked to be the entire squad hauling ass over to their position. The cavalry had arrived, and they looked absolutely pissed. Newman was in the middle of fumbling for another grenade as the reinforcements started filtering in. And as the squad of 2-3 began to take up positions, the private yanked the pin like he was on an assembly line and scrambled for a good spot to throw his now that he was in a new position. Finch was in the middle of whipping his head around to get a good look at who was filtering in around him while still maintaining situational awareness, and he caught a glimpse of Staff Sergeant Michaels. The squad leader was in an animated discussion with the SEALs squad leader, both men gesturing at the fortification while Rays nodded along, adding his own input to whatever clusterfuck of a plan they were cooking up. But as he looked back over to the hole, Finch caught something that snapped his attention back into a laser focus. Something glimmered in the gap, a flash of metal or maybe magical rainbows as someone tried to peek out again. The lance corporal didn't hesitate or wait for whatever was in the gap to shoot itself. Finch immediately opened fire, squeezing the trigger repeatedly as rounds sparked off as something. The ricochets created a light show of multi-layered colors, blues and purples rippling across what looked like empty air, even though a whole person shuffled into view. It was maddening. Finch's rounds bounced off whatever this was in a way similar to shooting a steel plate. It even produced a pyrotechnic display that would have been pretty if it wasn't so damn terrifying. As soon as the magical light show started, whoever was behind it yanked back into cover, cursing in whatever weird sing-song language these fantasy rejects spoke. Their voice carried up through the hole, probably calling Finch's mother something unpleasant in Elvish or whatever the fuck. "Frag out!" Newman yelled again, tossing another grenade into the hole before scrambling into his old position on the opposite side of the trench. He brought his weapon up, covering the entrance from a different angle. "Yo, watch that bitch! I'm changing mags!" Finch called out to Pham, who was standing just off to the side, while dropping his empty magazine and reaching for a new one. Pham seemed unsure of what to do or where to stand until Finch spoke up. Then the boot appeared to know exactly what to do, and he didn't hesitate as he took the lance corporal's position and fired a few rounds to keep whoever was inside's head down. Another concussive thud echoed from deep within the fortification as Newman's second grenade hit its mark, causing Pham to cease fire and glare at the entrance as if trying to bore a new hole through with his eyes. "Yep, they're still scurrying around in there," Finch yelled after slapping a fresh magazine home and hitting the bolt release. He risked a quick glance around and saw that his entire squad, including the SEALs, had made their way directly to what Finch believed was the main part of the fortification. The SEALs were carefully positioning what looked like a door frame if door frames were crafted by someone with a doctorate in making shit explode over the disturbed, bare ground. Not only that, these bastards were layering it over what had to be several pounds of C4, creating some kind of shaped charge monstrosity. One of the also the same operator they'd found themselves in the trench with earlier was grumbling menacingly as he worked, his face twisted in an expression of pure vindictive anger. "They wanna play fucking games?" he growled, carefully placing another block of C4. "Fine, we can play some fucking games. Let's see how their magic bullshit likes this." That's when it clicked for Finch. Oh, that wasn't just a breaching charge. That was a fuck you and everything within a 50-foot radius charge. They weren't planning to breach the fortification, they were planning to delete it. "Staff," Sergeant Michael's voice then cut through Finch's revelation. "Finch, Newman, fam, get the fuck over here. They're gonna blow that shit into the next universe." Finch didn't need to be told twice. He grabbed Fam's shoulder and scrambled away from the entrance with Newman hot on their heels. The senior private tossed one more grenade in for good measure before hauling ass toward the rest of their squad. Behind them, the SEALs were making final adjustments to their improvised WMD. And Finch could see the demo guy holding the clacker with an expression that could only be described as gleeful malice. "How far back we getting, Sarge?" Fam asked as he slid into position with the rest of his squad. "Far as fucking possible," Michaels replied, "already moving." When they say big boom, they mean big boom. The entire force started pulling back, looking for whatever cover they could find while staying safe. Finch ended up behind what was once a tree but was now more of a scorched log, and he pressed himself low, opening his mouth to prepare for the pressure wave about to hit. This was going to be biblical. It wasn't long before the SEALs scattered like rats fleeing a sinking ship as they put distance between themselves and their homemade apocalypse. The entire assault force retreated in controlled chaos, each man finding whatever cover the devastated landscape could offer, but only silence greeted them. There was a kind of quiet that made you restless, and then there was a kind of quiet that made your ears ring. This type somehow managed to do both while a distant cacophony of explosions and intense firefights throughout the forest dominated their surroundings. Finch pressed himself lower behind his scorched log, mouth open, hands over his earpro, waiting for the inevitable. A voice resounded across the wasteland with vindictive glee. "Eat shit and die, fire in the hole, fire in the hole, fire in the hole." Finch counted the beats. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3. The deafening roar that followed matched the previous rolling airstrikes, but this explosion was focused into a single, devastating burst. The ground beneath Finch didn't just shake, it surged, lifting him momentarily off the ground before slamming him back down on his knees. It was nowhere near as powerful as a 2,000 pound bomb, but he was definitely a lot closer to this one. The pressure wave hit like a physical punch to everything at once, and Finch could already feel the traumatic brain injury, TBI, starting to form in his distant future, ready to mess with him at the VA in 20 years. His vision blurred briefly. Then all was just brown as a wall of dust and debris swept over their position. Dirt rained down like hail, mixed with chunks of stone and what might have been pieces of the fortification or its former occupants. Finch couldn't tell and didn't want to know. Through the ringing in his ears and the choking dust cloud, he heard movement. Looking up through squinted eyes, he glimpsed the SEALs already sprinting toward the smoking crater they'd just created like wraiths racing for the souls of the damned. These crazy bastards weren't even waiting for the dust to clear. Go, get the fuck in there." Finch heard Staff Sergeant Michael's voice cut through the chaos, not wanting to be left behind like some boot who couldn't hang. That was all the encouragement Finch needed. He pushed himself up, ignoring all the barbed alien trash snagging on his gear, and sprinted after the SEALs. He and the rest of his squad made it through the dust cloud and spotted what looked like a flashbang arc through the air and disappear into the massive crater SEALs had just blown into existence. The sharp pop of the flashbang was immediately followed by a rush of bodies diving in and a chorus of suppressed gunfire. The sound was different from regular gunfire, quieter but somehow more threatening, like angry hisses of death echoing up from the hole. Finch reached the edge of the crater and almost ate shit as the loose earth gave way under his boots. What had been a fortified entrance was now a gaping wound in the earth, easily 20 feet across and God knew how deep. The SEALs were already inside, their weapons chattering as they pushed into whatever remained of the underground complex. "Get in there, Finch!" Reyes yelled directly behind him. Without thinking, Finch slides down the caved-in roof. The drop was much longer than he expected, but he still managed to land in one piece as he hit the bottom hard, knees buckling as he tried to absorb the impact. The world inside the crater was absolute Koza dust so thick you could chew it. The acrid smell of explosives mixed with the smell of rusted iron and something else entirely. Inside, only the scene of complete horror met Finch. There were quite a few more than 3 dudes in here, and now they were all in pieces, spread across the room like some kind of macabre, poorly made horror show. The only difference was that there wasn't too much blood, just dirt. Finch raised his rifle, squinting through the haze, trying to understand the underground hellscape they had just been forced into. Somewhere in the darkness ahead, he could hear shouting in that alien language. The constant crack of suppressed rifles echoed as the SEALs cleared the corridor. They were advancing down, but it was joined by bursts of magical energy. But, when he realized that the SEALs had gone down a corridor, Finch couldn't help but pause and look up. That was no corridor. No, this wasn't some beat-up, haphazard tunnel that a bunch of grunts had scraped out of the dirt with shovels and pickaxes over a few miserable weeks. He was standing there, staring down into a perfectly arched tunnel. The walls were crafted from smooth, almost polished stone. The ceiling was flat and towering. Hell, this was genuine engineering, wide enough to comfortably drive a damn small car through it. Dark, evenly spaced doorways led into unseen rooms, and the main corridor stretched for what must have been several hundred feet before sharply turning into the oppressively lit passage. This wasn't a trench, it was a damn underground base. A sheet of broken bar. Newman let out an uneasy groan. The all-too-familiar introduction for a special report filled every living room and flooded social media across America as the broadcasting news network's special report graphics lit up screens. The deep red breaking news banner pulsed urgently as dramatic orchestral music swelled. Rumors are confirmed. I'm Jessica Byrne. Thank you for tuning into this evening's BNN special report, a feminine voice announced as the intro roll faded to reveal a woman sitting at a sparse, off-white desk with a green screen showing B-roll footage of the Ohio incident. U.S. officials confirm leaks of an alleged high-profile defector that's seeking asylum. Jessica Byrne paused briefly to let some tension build, but more importantly, to give herself a moment to gather her composure. The woman had the privilege of delivering one of the most incredible and significant pieces of news that has graced their network in this decade. Hell, it might have been the most important piece of news this network has ever read. The anchor herself was the embodiment of network news professionalism. Her platinum blonde hair was styled in a sleek, shoulder-length bob that never moved as she stared intently into the camera. Her deep black dress shirt was accented with a simple gold necklace, and her makeup remained flawless despite hours of preparation for this moment. But it was her steel gray eyes that commanded attention, usually cool and analytical, now showing cracks of barely contained excitement as a massive display showed a stylized graphic reading, "Defector confirmed, White House to address alien asylum." After weeks of speculation, unnamed sources, and what the administration has repeatedly called dangerous conspiracy theories, Byrne paused once more to build suspense and perfect her delivery. BNN can now confirm that senior officials have acknowledged the extraordinary truth that the United States is indeed harboring at least one high-level defector from the hostile alien empire from beyond the rift in Ohio. Byrne folded her perfectly manicured hands on the desk and paused to let the weight of her words settle before continuing. For our viewers who are unaware and just tuning in, let me provide some context. Over the past 6 months, social media has been flooded with rumors of blurred photos, alleged eyewitness reports, and first-hand accounts from academics suggesting that the U.S. authorities are hiding what sources describe as transdimensional elven beings with extraordinary supernatural powers. The Pentagon initially dismissed these claims as, quote, "a insane internet fabrication and dangerous misinformation that undermines national security." White House Press Secretary Jennifer Morrison went so far as to call the rumors canon-level fantasy just last Tuesday. Maintaining her composed and professional appearance, Byrne moved to the climax of her report. However, through our investigation, BNN has obtained confirmation from 3 separate sources within the administration. What we're reporting tonight is not speculation, it is verified fact. She leaned forward slightly, gazing sharply at the camera with her steel-gray eyes. The National Security Advisor, Eliza Sutton. Congressman Timothy Hawthorne from Texas, who sits on the Permanent Select Committee on Intelligentsia, and the Director of Homeland Security, Roland Hayes, have all, within the last hour, confirmed the existence of this individual. The anchor hesitated and shifted in her seat as she seemingly struggled with the next series of words on the teleprompter. According to these officials, this defector possessed, and I'm quoting directly from the National Security Advisor here, capabilities that fundamentally challenge our understanding of physics and reality. Burns read as seriously as possible. Even though Burns had gone over this script countless times, the claims still sounded as absurd and unbelievable as watching a UFO land and little green men walk out. The congressman was more specific, stating that this individual can, quote, manipulate energy fields in ways that resemble what popular culture would call magic. She continued, maintaining her professional composure. I need to emphasize this for our viewers, Brines added with a tone of disbelief. Senior U.S. officials are confirming that we have in protective custody a being from another dimension who can perform what they're calling magic. Not technology we don't understand, not advanced science magic. Something out of a Tolkien novel or a fairy tale. Burns then slightly shook her head as if she had spoken blasphemy. The Director of Homeland Security went even further, describing demonstrations of spontaneous matter transformation and violation of thermodynamic principles through will alone. Earlier today, our Capitol Hill correspondent managed to catch up with Congressman Hawthorne just as he was leaving an emergency intelligence briefing. This is what he had to say. The screen faded into shaky footage from a chaotic marble hallway. At the center of the chaos was Congressman Timothy Hawthorne, a chubby yet sturdy man built like a bulldog. He cringed at the mass of people rushing toward him, but the congressman schooled his features, adjusted his broad, imposing frame, and kept walking. Bright flashing lights from cameras going off bounced off the center of his balding head, and his expensive suit seemed to be the only thing holding his stocky presence together. Behind his conservative glasses, Hawthorne's eyes narrowed and scanned the reporters with the tired, calculating gaze of a politician who has survived countless media ambushes. Congressman Hawthorne. Multiple voices called out at the same time. Can you confirm the reports about the alien defector? Hawthorne stopped abruptly, causing several of the reporters shuffling after him to nearly collide with each other. He then turned to face the cameras with the kind of calculated spontaneity that only comes from decades in politics. I've just come from a classified briefing, so there's only so much I can say, he began in his iconic Texan drawl, which was softened by layers of Washington polish. But given the unauthorized disclosures that have already compromised operational security, I believe the American people deserve some measure of truth. He adjusted his glasses in an effort to buy himself a moment to choose his words carefully. I can confirm that the United States has been providing protective custody to an individual I want to stress, a sentient, intelligent individual who originated from beyond what we're calling the anomalous region in Ohio. Is it true they can perform magic? A reporter suddenly interrupted Hawthorne with a shout. Hawthorne pursed his lips after smacking them as he deliberated on how to answer this question. The individual in question possesses capabilities that challenge conventional scientific understanding. I've personally witnessed demonstrations that would have been dismissed as fantasy 6 months ago. We're not talking about advanced technology here. We're talking about fundamental manipulation of reality through means we can't comprehend yet. What kind of demonstrations? Another voice called out. I'm not at liberty to. He paused, seeming to reconsider. I will say this. I watched this individual transform the moisture in the air into flowing ice that twisted and turned with a gesture. I watched them generate electricity and electromagnetic effects without any equipment. These aren't tricks or illusions. The Joint Chiefs have confirmed these capabilities are real and represent both an unprecedented opportunity for scientific advancement and a significant security concern. A flurry of questions started to come after Congressman Hawthorne's answer. The barrage was so intense, no single question was coherent and left the politician disoriented as he subtly recoiled away. However, there was one question that stood out from the incoherent cacophony. Congressman Hawthorne. Congressman Hawthorne, a journalist from BNN, pushes through the writhing crowd of bodies and cameras. Is this person dangerous? Hawthorne's expression grew stern. Any being capable of such feats could be dangerous. But I want to be clearer. This individual came to us voluntarily, seeking asylum from what they describe as an excessively brutal authoritarian regime. They've been nothing but cooperative and have provided invaluable intelligence about the forces we're currently engaged with beyond the rift. An aide suddenly appeared from around the corner, running down the hall before squeezing past the reporters and whispering urgently into the congressman's ear. Hawthorne's eyes narrowed, and his face went rigid before he gave a simple nod. "I need to go," the stout politician said, pushing his way past the crowd as the journalists went into a frenzy. "The White House will be holding a full briefing shortly. I encourage all Americans to remember that we're living in unprecedented times, and what was impossible yesterday is reality today. We need to approach this with open minds and steadfast resolve." But just as he was about to walk off, Hawthorne paused and then glanced back at the cameras once more. "And to our allies and adversaries alike here, yes. This is real. Yes, we have such an individual in protective custody. And yes, we will defend them with the full might the United States of America can muster if necessary." That's all I can say at this time. As the congressman walked away, the footage faded and cut back to Jessica Byrne in the studio. The woman maintained her tough expression and glared at the camera as if this was just another story, even though she felt like this new reality was a fever dream. The White House press briefing is about to start in just a minute. Stay with us for ongoing coverage of what could be the most important moment in human history. Burns finished just before she and her desk faded away. Instead of the anchor, the screen displayed the official White House waiting graphic. A sleek navy blue background featured the building's iconic silhouette, with a gently waving American flag above. "We will begin shortly" was written in bold white letters, as a digital timer tracked the seconds passing. 1:15. 1:14. 1:13. A broken bar. When the counter hit 0, the image dissolved to reveal the familiar James S. Brady press briefing room. Press Secretary Ashley Gravitz walked to the podium with a friendly smile that seemed genuine despite the circumstances. The woman was dressed professionally, yet still approachable in her pearl white dress that ended just above her knees. Her raven hair was cut into a stylish, edgy bob that framed her face perfectly and bounced with every step in her business-oriented, yet comfortable flats. "Good evening, everybody," she said warmly, gripping the microphone with manicured hands and adjusted at the moment she reached the podium. "I apologize for ruining your Saturday evening, but I also know you're most likely very excited to hear what we have to say." A few journalists from the press pool expressed their agreement, and a few light-hearted grumbles were heard. Ashley let out a soft, humming laugh that seemed to ease some of the electricity in the air. "I'm very excited to share this news, and it's good to see everyone back here. Things are going to get very busy, very quickly." After a few moments of adjusting herself, Ashley's expression grew more serious as she straightened her back and squared her shoulders. "What we're about to discuss represents a fundamental shift in our understanding of the world and worlds around us. The United States government has been involved in sensitive operations concerning individuals from beyond the dimensional anomaly in Ohio, and we are currently in talks with multiple parties seeking refuge from what our intelligence has identified as an oppressive regime. The President will provide more details, but I want to emphasize that everything we're doing is in accordance with U.S. law and we are doing our best to uphold our humanitarian obligations." She glanced at her notes briefly before stepping aside from the podium. Ashley then motioned to the side stage. "Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States," she announced as a tall, fit man in his 50s with graying-brown hair emerged from the left door. President Vincent Pearson still carried himself with a commanding presence, even though a hint of silver had touched his perfectly styled, light brown hair while wearing a deep blue suit. The influential man was flanked by National Security Advisor Eliza Sutton, a relatively short woman well into her 60s, along with Secretary of Defense Mark Lee and a member of the Joint Chiefs. Pearson offered the crowd of reporters a confident smile and a casual wave as he approached the podium. "Good evening, "Everybody, how are you all doing?" he said in an almost cavalier tone before reaching the podium. A few responses came from the crowd, but given the seriousness of the moment, everyone was very tense. Camera shutters clicked rapidly as photographers sought the best angles for a shot that would clearly capture this historic moment. "Tonight we'll start by addressing the biggest issue, and then we'll take your questions," the president began in his usual well-rehearsed blend of authority and warmth that had helped him win the election. "In the last several hours, you may have seen reports from news organizations or posts on the internet suggesting that we have come into contact with an individual seeking asylum within the United States." He paused, letting his gaze sweep across the room full of reporters who hung on every word. "I am here to tell you today that those rumors and reports are true." A ripple of excitement and disbelief spread throughout the press room. Reporters shifted in their seats, pens scratched frantically on notepads, and thumbs darted furiously across phone screens. The energy was electric, and everyone seemed to almost abandon professionalism while processing what was essentially confirmation of intelligent alien life. The president, however, raised a hand slightly, and the room settled, though the excitement still simmered beneath the surface. "This individual came to us as a refugee, fleeing potential persecution from their homeland," the president continued, gripping the sides of the podium for support as he leaned forward. "They sought the protection that America has always offered to those yearning to breathe free." He chose his words very carefully to avoid giving out any physical descriptions or gender pronouns. He wanted to make sure no one could glean even a hint of information or hazard a guess. So the president did exactly as he was advised by his intelligence team and worked to create an environment where speculation and misinformation could run wild. Taking a moment to look around, the president then continued his speech and adopted a more authoritative and outraged tone. "The regime they fled from, or what they call the Seraphic Emperor, represents everything America stands against. Our intelligence assessments, corroborated by this brave individual's testimony, paint a picture of a cruel, ruthless, and inhumane authoritarian state. A regime that rules through fear, that suppresses individual liberty, and that views life as expendable." Pearson's jaw tightened, and narrowed his eyes to look legitimately angry. "From the outset, this empire has done nothing but show hostility to our guest. Hell, this empire has shown nothing but hostility toward our own world. Ever since the dimensional anomaly appeared, this regime has attacked our people without provocation, destroyed our homes, and leveled an entire city and several towns. This emperor and their enablers have shown a callous disregard for the rules of war that civilized nations abide by, and have even condemned their own people to death, based on a lie." He gripped the edges of the podium, leaning forward slightly. "But today, we have proof that not everyone living under that regime's boot heel agrees with its methods. Today, we celebrate the courage of individuals willing to risk everything to escape tyranny and seek freedom." The president's expression grew even more serious as he continued, his hands gripping the podium edges with white-knuckled intensity. "Let me be absolutely clear about something," Pearson said, his voice taking on a harder edge. "We are taking every conceivable measure to ensure this individual's safety. This involves multiple layers of security utilizing an innumerable amount of law enforcement personnel, deputized military personnel, and intelligence agents working around the clock." He paused, letting that sink in before continuing. "Because make no mistake here, the Empire is not the only entity that would seek to undermine us or discover who this person is. There are adversarial nation-states and non-state actors who would stop at nothing to exploit this individual for their own means, or worse, eliminate them entirely." President Pearson's jaw set firmly. "That is why we have created what I'm calling a gilded cage, a multi-layered security blanket that ensures both the safety and comfort of this brave individual. They deserve nothing less than our full protection after the courage they've shown." He straightened, scanning the room. "Now, I'll take your questions." The press room erupted into absolute chaos. Dozens of voices called out simultaneously, hands shot up, and reporters practically climbed over each other trying to get the president's attention. Pearson pointed to a man in the front row. "Yes, Jim." The reporter stood quickly as the rest seemed to quieten, but still vibrated with intense energy. "Mr. President, can you elaborate on the specific security measures you're taking to ensure this person's safety?" "I must be careful not to compromise operational security," the president replied. "Rest assured, a network of FBI counterintelligence, federal and state law enforcement, and military assets is dedicated to securing the Gilded Cage. No movement occurs without the protection of armed convoys and a full military escort." He then motioned to the Joint Chief standing to his left. "General Morrison can speak to the military component." The general, a stern-faced man with steel-gray hair, stepped forward. "Thank you, Mr. President." To expand on the answer, "We have already activated the National Guard and Air National Guard units in support of this operation. This includes soldiers, vehicles, Apache attack helicopters, and F-16 fighter aircraft providing aerial escort for any convoy movements." His voice carried the weight of barely restrained threat. "Let me be crystal clearer. This is a big-stake approach. Anyone foolish enough to move on the principle will face the full might of the United States military. We are not playing games here." The general stepped back, and President Pearson took the podium again as another wave of questions erupted. He pointed to a woman in the third row. "Mr. President, is there anything at all you can tell us about this individual? What are they? What do they look like?" A long moment of silence followed as Pearson deliberated for some time. His fingers drummed dramatically against the podium as the sensitive mic picked up the rhythmic beat. The entire room held its breath, awaiting any morsel of information about this otherworldly asylum seeker. Camera shutters clicked rapidly, capturing the president's thoughtful expression until he finally leaned into the microphone. "After careful consideration and consulting with our security teams," the president spoke slowly with narrowed eyes, "we have decided to release only 2 pieces of information about this individual at this time." The tension in the room was palpable. Every reporter leaned forward, pens poised, fingers ready to type. "First," the president said slowly, "the individual is male." A murmur ran through the crowd as reporters scribbled frantically. "And second," Pearson continued, his expression unreadable, "he is very, very old." A low, languid meow left a cat's mouth as a dainty, pale, well-manicured hand had gently scratched under its chin. The feline a lithe tabby with a bit of an attitude purred contentedly in the lap of its benefactor. "I would suppose I am old to you humans," a voice spoke in fluent English, though tinged with a strange accent that almost sounded French. "But I am certainly not male." Al sat gracefully in an overstuffed armchair, one leg crossed over the other. Her pale hand seemed to glow compared to the monolithic, opaque tights that tightly hugged her legs. The woman's features were nearly too perfect to be human, and her very long, distinctive, pointed ears identified her as a high elf. She had traded her business suits from earlier meetings for a stylish dress that ended halfway up her thighs, made of deep burgundy fabric that complemented her otherworldly complexion. As she absent-mindedly twisted her foot on the heel of her 2-inch pumps, another car to a sleek CMC playfully batted at the moving shoe as if trying to catch it with its paw. In response to the high elf's gentle correction, a soft, feminine chuckle echoed from across the table. Toy Vone sat in a matching chair, looking every bit the refined government handler in her pencil skirt and stylish Chanel-style cardigan that fit perfectly over a white, form-fitting frilly dress shirt. Toy Vone twisted her neck, causing her raven hair, pulled back in a neat chignon, to lightly bounce. "Oh, we're very well aware," she said, taking a delicate sip of tea before setting the cup down beside her cheesecake, causing the fine china to lightly clink against the saucer. "We're doing this entirely on purpose." She then picked up a small fork and carved off a piece of the dessert, gesturing with it as she explained. "The best way to keep you safe is to muddy the waters so thoroughly, throw out so many false leads, that it becomes nearly impossible to identify who or even what we're actually talking about. For instance, we have many other arcane-capable individuals who enjoy different levels of protection and custody," the newly appointed assistant director explained as her hand reached down to stroke the black cat that rubbed against her leg. "By throwing in thousands of lies and mixing them with thousands of truths, no one will truly be able to identify who the real high-value targets are. Zal stopped petting the cat on her lap, causing it to meow in protest, and reached for her own treat, a perfectly torched CRA-diaresis me bra LA copyright E. She pressed down on the caramelized layer with a spoon, piercing the hardened sugar top with a satisfying snap like thin ice. That makes sense, the elf mused, spooning up a bite of the custard. If there are so many pieces of conflicting information flying around at once, it makes it difficult to detect which piece of information is false, irrelevant, or even worth focusing on. Her silver eyes an impossible shade with a flicker of violet lifted to the television mounted on the wall. President Pearson continued to answer questions at the briefing, maintaining a composed expression despite the chaos in the press room. Though I am curious, Zal continued, her tone deceptively casual, why am I not being offered the same level of protection he's describing? I only get a couple of cars and a few dozen guards at best, she said with growing interest in her voice. She more or less pieced together the reason why mid-sentence. No fighting contraptions or attack things for me. Toyvone took another bite of cheesecake, savoring her perfectly crafted treat for a few moments before responding. The best way to keep someone safe is to not be a target in the first place, or at least, to minimize your signature as a target as much as possible. She put down her fork and leaned back, crossing her legs just like Zal's stance. To anyone paying attention, you're just another foreign dignitary here for diplomatic reasons. We have thousands, if not tens of thousands, of such individuals in the country at any given time. Mere ambassadors, trade representatives, cultural attaché copyright S, and even others from beyond the rift. You blend into that background. On the television, a reporter was asking about the age of the defector, clearly trying to understand what very, very old meant in context. Besides, Toyvone added with a slight smile, those couple of dozen guards aren't exactly mall security. Each one is hand-picked from our best across agencies and even our military. And those couple of cars have some very interesting modifications in them. The tabby in Zal's lap had given up on getting more scratches and instead chose to knead its claws into the expensive fabric of her dress. The elf didn't seem to mind, her fingers absently stroking its fur as she watched the president deflect another question about the defector's appearance. Zal just hummed thoughtfully as her other hand brought more of the torched custard to her mouth, savoring the rich sweetness while she contemplated this elaborate deception. The spoon clinked softly against the ramekin as she set it down. So it's the equivalent of finding a single blade of grass on a lush hill, she mused, without even the faintest idea of what the features of the blade of grass you're looking for are in the first place. Her foot began to tap idly on the carpeted floor, keeping time with the beat of the soft, groovy pop music playing quietly from hidden speakers. The rhythm was subtle but infectious, as something modern with a vintage twist that seemed to suit the surreal domesticity of the moment. It was something she would have to warn these people about if they ever encountered the unseelie court of the Fae. Or more aptly, the undead. Music had a way of far broken bar attracting and charming those of the unseelie. Toyvone shrugged in a way that was both casual and elegant. The idiom here would be finding a needle in a haystack. But actually, it's more like finding a specific needle in a massive pile of needles. She corrected before the black cat that had been weaving around her legs suddenly jumped onto the arm of the tall chair and then crawled into Toyvone's lap with feline entitlement. She began stroking it affectionately, her fingers running through the glossy fur as it started to purr. A lot of what they said wasn't a lie, per se, she continued, scratching behind the cat's ears. It's just that finding out what's meaningful or not is going to be the problem. As a matter of fact, we have quite a few more leaks coming down the pipeline to make things even more confusing. Zal paused mid-bite and shot Toyvone a look that seemed to suggest she wanted to go up and paint the moon purple. Her silver eyes narrowed slightly as one graceful eyebrow arched in a way that transcended cultural boundaries, conveying universal skepticism. Offering only a smug shrug, Toyvone went back to sipping her tea, clearly enjoying both the Earl Grey and the elf's expression. The black cat had curled into a perfect circle and wrapped its fuzzy tail around itself as Toyvone gently stroked the feline. We have a wider plan in motion, she added after a moment, setting her teacup down with a self-satisfied smile, enjoying her time off with Zal and finally being able to relax for a day. In order to gain some form of acceptance for you and your kind, we need to make things a little more overt. She paused to give the cat a particularly satisfying scratch under its chin, eliciting a rumbling purr that seemed to vibrate through the entire chair. It would make moving you a lot easier, Toyvone explained, her tone shifting to something more strategic. But more importantly, it would help normalize our new, magical reality for the American people. The television continued its coverage in the background with reporters still firing questions at the president about the mysterious ancient defector. Neither woman paid it much attention now as they found themselves playing a much bigger game, influencing the course of entire civilizations. Acceptance through exposure, Toyvone explained, her voice carrying a note of pride that suggested she'd played a significant role in shaping this operation. We're gradually revealing you and your kind to the American public, but under the guise of the oppressed that the United States has a duty to protect. She paused, clearly savoring both her cheesecake and her own cleverness. It's a delicate psychological operation, really. We're reframing the entire narrative around your kind's existence. Zal hummed thoughtfully, her fingers still absent-mindedly stroking the purring tabby. Isn't that controversial, though? I've read your country's history over these months. A broken bar and the approach of a invading to liberate hasn't exactly panned out well before. Toyvone chuckled, a knowing sound that indicated she had anticipated this remark. She took another bite of her cheesecake, watching the ancient elf who appeared no older than a college girl, an irony that never failed to amuse her. That's true, she conceded, setting down her fork. However, instead of marching off to invade and overthrow in the name of liberation, which can always be spun as colonization, we're taking a different approach. We're leaving the door open for those who are oppressed to join hands with America, to accept freedom and independence, to break free from their shackles and turn against their masters. The assistant director's eyes gleamed with strategic satisfaction. This opens many doors for us. Intelligence-wise, immigration-wise. It's a psychological campaign aimed at the American people themselves. We're shifting the narrative from invaders from another dimension to defectors and refugees seeking to turn and fight against a tyrant. The key word here is a fight. She then resumed petting the cat's head like an evil villain. You see, the American people was founded on the notion of independent, freedom-seeking pilgrims founding their own nation and fighting tooth and nail to keep it a democracy, Toyvone explained as Zal furrowed her brows. If the American people see that your people are fighting and helping us, their opinion will dramatically shift. And once that shift happens, it becomes America's moral mandate to help. Zal's silver eyes narrowed slightly, seeing through the layers of the plan. But what you really want isn't freelancers or those who actually fight, but rather those skilled in the arcane arts. Those who possess abilities enhanced by magical energy can be a valuable resource for learning or instruction. This gives you the perfect way to acquire as many as you can with minimal societal friction, all while obfuscating my presence. Toyvone's lips twisted into a nearly predatory smirk. While that is absolutely correct, you should know you and Lysandra aren't quite the only ones we're working with now. She leaned forward slightly, causing the black cat to shift its position with an annoyed mew. You may be the most important, given your niche knowledge, but quite a few of your colleagues who participated in the incursion and a few peers are already working with us. Some came through the rift after the chaos of it opening. Others have been recruited through various channels. The television droned on in the background, the president still fielding questions about the single, ancient, male defector. The irony wasn't lost on either woman or while the world focused on a phantom. An entire network of magical beings was already being woven into the fabric of American industry, academia and intelligence operations. They've all been carefully vetted, of course. Not that we had to try particularly hard when they've been cornered and lost in a strange world. Toyvone continued. Each one has their own handlers, their own safe houses, their own cover stories. You're the flagship of this program, Zal. But you're far from alone. We're building something unprecedented here, a fusion of your world's capabilities with our world's technology. The groovy pop music shifted to something with a mellow and lo-fi influence, making the rhythm more relaxing and layered. Like the plan Toyvone was describing, Zal thought. Multiple elements working in harmony to create something that seemed simple on the surface but was intricate underneath. And your people who have been slighted by our invasion? Zal asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Will welcome you with open arms, Toyvone said confidently. Once we've properly prepared them. Nothing tugs at American heartstrings quite like the story of people yearning to breathe free. We've built our entire national ethos on it. Toyvone continued while her nails idly ran through the black cat's head. This will be especially easy considering how eerily similar you and all the others from beyond the rift are to the mythologies of Earth. Elves are already deeply ingrained in not just America's cultural zeitgeist, but the world's. She paused to take another sip of tea as her eyes gleamed with strategic calculation. There will be an extremely substantial attraction and curiosity the American people will have towards you and your kind. Frankly, this won't exactly be a difficult sell in the first place. We just have to frame things properly. Her expression darkened slightly. While aggressively stamping out those who refused our offer of amnesty and instead chose to go deep underground. Zal hummed thoughtfully at that. The elf's gaze drifted off to some middle distance as she processed the bit of freelancer going rogue. She wasn't particularly surprised that there were holdouts who had dropped off the radar, so to speak. I suppose that's to be expected, she mused, her accent making the words sound almost musical. Not everyone adapts well to changing circumstances, she added while her mind wandered to her own journey. She had deliberately chosen exile, setting out on adventures to broaden her horizons and leave the great city behind. She wanted to discover what was beyond their borders, to experience grand adventures like the stories of high elves from before the Great Sundering, before the tragedy that the high elf Archmage Fyra had caused through her grief, which led them to isolate themselves in the first place. Not that she'd really needed much convincing to leave, considering the blasphemy she'd been committing by secretly studying her new goddess's magic. The thought made her fingers unconsciously trace a small pattern on the armrest, to a habit she'd developed when thinking of things better left unspoken. Freelancers have always been a rather mixed bag, Zal continued, returning her attention to Toyvone. A lot of rather sinister ne'er-do-wells and criminals are common among those who take up mercenary work. There were quite a few unsavory types in the ranks of the expeditionary forces that accompanied us when we marched with the Imperials. She delicately placed her empty ramekin on the side table, causing the spoon to softly clink against the ceramic. I imagine some of them saw the chaos of defeat as an opportunity to vanish into your world. Start fresh, maybe, or just continue their proclivities in a place where the local authorities are unfamiliar with them. The Siamese cat had given up on catching Zal's shoe and was now grooming itself with one leg stretched out impossibly high in typical feline dignity. The domestic scene sharply contrasted with the discussion of interdimensional espionage and the magical fugitives hiding somewhere in America's vast landscape. There'll be problems, Zal stated matter-of-factly. Some were merely opportunists, but I recognized a few others. They have skills and temperaments that make them genuinely dangerous, especially if they feel cornered. Toyvone let out a soft, pleasant chuckle. We're very well aware. My counterparts in the FBI and other law enforcement agencies have already learned that the hard way. Oh, I can very well believe that, Zal responded, adjusting the tabby in her lap as it protested the movement. A lot of the cretins who signed up for this expedition were only in it to loot this world of all its valuables. I'm more than certain the Imperials were counting on just that, even though the stated purpose of the Freelancer Corps was explicitly for security and peacekeeping. A hum of curiosity escaped Toyvone's mouth as she took the small teapot and poured herself another cup of the delicious amber liquid before glancing at Zal with an expression of mock innocence. Was that your purpose as well? She asked playfully, Fully aware it wasn't the case, Zal rolled her eyes and scoffed, a habit she'd picked up from being around these humans for too long. Of course not. She shifted in her seat as a small smile played across her ethereal features. My primary purpose was knowledge. To be one of the few to cross into another world and learn firsthand what awaits there. To explore the unexplored and learn about new cultures, magics, and, well, technologies. Another realm harder. That was more than enough to convince me to sign up for an expedition full of undesirables. This time, a surprisingly girlish giggle escaped from the usually composed assistant director as she dropped a few sugar cubes into her tea. After stirring her tea with a silver spoon and taking a sip, Toyvonne finally asked, "And did you find what you were looking for here?" Leaning back, Zal sighed contentedly as her whole posture relaxed. "Oh, I have found far more than I could ever hope for. This is like a wondrous dream," she said, tapping her fingers in excitement on the armrests as she thought about the methods these humans used to manipulate their environment and solve problems without magic. It was the very peak of avant-garde. There were solutions to problems Zal couldn't even dream of, which led to questions she couldn't even fathom. The scientific method these humans had developed was similar to the principles she was familiar with in the worlds of scholars and mages, but much more aggressive. It opened doors to possibilities that would push both worlds' understanding of reality and what lies beyond into a new age. But as the High Elf's thoughts drifted, her face began to cloud over like a passing shadow, dimming the brightness as it crosses the sun. Although the price for this was quite high. Her silver eyes wandered to the side in an unfocused manner as she thought about one face in particular. The silence stretched for a few moments before Zal's voice took on a softer, more introspective tone. Though perhaps there was some truth to the elders harping on about Archmage Fyra. She paused, her fingers returning to absent-mindedly stroke the tabby's fur. "Involving yourself with a human is a fool's errand." She seemed to be speaking more to herself now, completely lost in thought. "My involvement with Gideon was only a fraction of that of the Archmage's with her human." Archmage Fyra's relationship extended to romance, and my dealings with Gideon were those of a wonderful friend. Yet, she trailed off, then continued with a note of bitter understanding. "I think I now have some comprehension of why High Elves are forbidden to leave the city, and why those who do are exiled, never to return." The weight of those few years felt like centuries to Zal, pressing heavily on her shoulders. The cats, perhaps sensing her changing mood, had grown quieter. Even the playful Siamese had stopped grooming itself to watch the elf with those inscrutable feline eyes. Sensing the High Elf's melancholy, Toyvonne allowed her to process her trauma as the television droned on in the background. The president was still fielding questions about a defector who didn't exist as they imagined, while the real defector sat in a cozy cat cafe in Boston, pondering the cost of knowledge. A multitude of races sat haphazardly on the metal bleachers in a large gymnasium in an undisclosed location. As they awaited their fate, these beings nervously shifted, causing the thin metal supports to groan under the heavy collective weight. Many still wore their once proud armor, which told stories of their past as freelancers, a time they might have been proud of. Now, a new story was being told. The dirt-caked and battered leather raw plates silently spoke of months spent desperately trying to survive in a foreign, hostile land. Even their mannerisms revealed tales of endured trauma and torment. Their eyes constantly darted between the exits and the heavily armed soldiers, who wore the horrifying foliage-patterned uniforms and wielded weapons that redefined fear, stationed at each door. Others who managed to adapt to their new surroundings and tried to blend in attempted to dress more like the natives of this strange world. A mix of hoodies, sweatpants, and even a few suits was seen on non-human frames. Most looked awkward, some even appeared homeless, but none truly seemed to belong. It was hard to pass as an Earthling because a very large portion of them weren't even human at all. Those from the other side of the rift, and those here in attendance, appeared in a kaleidoscope of shapes, colors, and sizes. Some were adorned with horns, while others had elongated ears. Even their humans seemed otherworldly, like their non-human companions, with eyes of a strangely colored hue. Irises of red, purple, and gold, which no Earth-born human possessed, were seen everywhere. But what truly made this scene surreal was the fact that elves looked uncomfortably in oversized hoodies, with their signature 4 to 6 inches hidden beneath beanies, trying to scoot away from the massive orc who sat there just as agitated. Goblins of various shades huddled together at the front of the bleachers. Usually, those with stone gray skin tend to stay away from their more brutal and brutish forest green cousins, but since coming to this forsaken land, they found there was safety in numbers. As time went on, whispers filled the air like buzzing insects. Some recognized each other from the early days of the incursion, surprised that the other had survived. Others simply sat in nervous silence, wondering if they'd walked into a trap and would be shot right then and there. Regardless of what anyone felt, anyway, the general consensus seemed to be that they were tired of running, tired of hiding, and if this was how they died, at least it would be quick. But as the buzz of conversation reached its peak, it instantly faded when the double doors swung open with a metallic groan. Soon after, the sharp click of pointed heels on the polished floor echoed through the gymnasium like gunshots, drawing every pair of eyes on the bleachers like the center of a singularity. No one said a word as they stared at a rather beautiful woman walking in, dressed in immaculate professional attire. Every inch of her spoke of a newly minted G-woman, from the pencil skirt that fell past her knees to the 3-inch pumps that clicked with military precision. Underneath her perfectly tailored blazer was a crisp white dress shirt that somehow complemented her deep, abyssal blue hair, styled in a crisp and taut ponytail. But what really drew everyone's attention wasn't the fact that she also wore an eye patch. No, it was her ears. The elongated, pointed tips identified her as one of them despite her Earth-style clothing. She marched, flanked by guards in foliage uniforms and several others dressed in equally professional attire. All of them, except for the guards, looked like they had stepped out of a corporate boardroom. Tucked under the crook of her arm, this elven government woman held a small tablet, but that detail seemed to be unnoticed by everyone. She stopped in front of a microphone stand and tapped it experimentally. The resulting pop and feedback buzz from the speakers made several of the more sensitive eared species wince. "Hello? Test, test." She tapped it again until satisfied, ignoring the murmurs that rippled through the crowd. Most seemed confused by the technology, although a few who had been hiding longer understood its purpose. Regardless, the bleachers erupted in a flurry as people started murmuring among themselves, wondering who in the infinite hells this sun elf was, but a few seemed to recognize her. "Is that Lysandra?" A few freelancers whispered among each other with shocked expressions. As if on cue, the woman continued. "Hello. I'm sure a few faces here recognize who I am," she said, causing silence to sweep across the gymnasium like a wave. "For those who do not," she continued, her voice carrying clearly through the speakers, "my name is Lysandra, former knight of House Ithaca before their fall, and prominent freelancer from Aldenshire." A ripple of recognition spread through the crowd. Even those who didn't know her personally had heard of her. The honorable knight who survived the imperial purge of one of the oldest houses of the vassal states and built a reputation as a skilled and dependable mercenary was on the lips of every aspiring freelancer. But more importantly, Lysandra said, allowing a small smile to grace her features, "I'm living proof that you have not, in fact, walked into a trap. The offer presented to you is very real." The gymnasium whispered again, but this time with a different energy, a tentative hope. It was desperate and fragile, but if a known and respected figure like Lysandra was standing there in earth clothes, flanked by earth soldiers who weren't shooting here a broken bar, then maybe, just maybe, they actually had a chance to get out of this alive. Lysandra let the moment stretch, watching as hope warred with suspicion on the faces before her. When she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of someone who had walked through fire and emerged transformed. "First, let me congratulate all of you for making it this far." She spoke in her native tongue, which sounded like a melodic, almost syllabic version of French. "You were smart enough to seize this opportunity when it was offered." She paused, letting her one good eye scan the roughly 300 faces on the high-capacity bleachers. "Because I assure you, the alternative would be most unpleasant," she said in a noticeably harsher tone. The gymnasium fell silent except for the nervous shifting of bodies and the creak of metal. Several of the smaller beings seemed to shrink into themselves, while the orcs, elves, and humans tensed. "Now," Lysandra continued, softening her tone slightly, "let me be clearer, your lives from here on out will be highly controlled. However," she raised a finger for emphasis, "depending on how much you cooperate, or what projects you volunteer for, your freedoms and comforts may greatly expand." She gestured to herself with an elegant sweep of her hand. "Take me, for instance. I chose to turn my back on the Empire." The word Empire came out like Lysandra was spitting poison. Her professional composure cracked for just a moment, but it was long enough to show the bitter fury beneath. Several freelancers who knew her history and what the Imperials did to Housefika couldn't help but cringe. "The same Empire," she continued, her voice tight with controlled emotion, "that purged the house I had sworn my sword and honor to. The Empire that slaughtered those I was oath-bound to protect." She took a breath, visibly centering herself before continuing. "I chose to embrace what I hope will be my new home, and look at me now." Lysandra spread her arms slightly, indicating her professional attire, her clear position of authority. "Those who choose mere cooperation will still find comfort and entertainment, warm beds, regular meals, and safety from those who would hunt you. You will definitely live better than you have these past months of running and hiding." Her eye gleamed as she leaned forward slightly. "But those who choose to walk the path I have, those who choose to truly serve and integrate, you will find not just comfort, but freedom, authority, purpose." She didn't mention any organization by name. Lysandra was more than certain that the numerous government agencies and departments would fight tooth and nail for any talent willing to throw their hat into the ring. No matter what path these people chose from here on out, it wasn't going to be a bad one. Even if they chose the path of a layabout, Lysandra was more than certain that those in charge would be happy to accommodate, as long as it meant removing such a dangerous element from the picture. However, there was another path to take. Because Lysandra stood before them not as a prisoner or a simple refugee, but as someone who had been granted power in this new world. Living proof that those who sought it could command respect and authority from the very forces that had defeated them. "I move freely through this world," she continued. "I have resources at my disposal that would astonish you. I am treated not as a conquered enemy, but as a valued asset. My expertise is sought, my counsel heeded." Lysandra's expression changed, becoming colder and more calculating as she held up the tablet. "For example," she said, her melodic voice sharpening with an edge that made several freelancers unconsciously straighten, "everyone's fate here rests completely in my hands." She continued, the small device catching the harsh gymnasium lights. She turned the tablet toward them, revealing that each of them already had a profile, though none could see beyond a mugshot and a name. The gesture itself sent a message here. This small piece of technology symbolized absolute power over their lives. "I am not just your point of contact with the authority that will control your lives," Lysandra said, choosing her words carefully for maximum effect. "I am that authority." Her eye scanned the crowd, and several individuals found themselves unable to meet her gaze. "With a few taps on this screen, I could classify any of you as too much of a lost cause to waste resources on." Lysandra's gaze fixed on each face as she hissed her threat. "And those classifications," she added softly, "are final." She then turned her palm over and gestured toward the armed guards, whose faces were hidden behind neck gaiters, fixing the crowd of fantasy netizens with a cold, intense stare. "These men and women answer to me in matters concerning you. My recommendations carry weight. My decisions are rarely questioned." The gymnasium had grown so silent that the hum of the ventilation system seemed deafening, and in true intelligence operative fashion, Lysandra let the silence linger to build more tension before speaking again. "Now, while the people of this world have proven to be remarkably forgiving and lenient to the point they're willing to offer second chances to those who once came as invaders, a broken bar I shall not be." Her voice hardened to match the steel in her singular. "I expect your absolute best behavior moving forward. Any who even fathom being problematic will be dealt with extreme prejudice." Lysandra began to pace slowly, her heels clicking in a steady rhythm. "You see, I have cultivated something valuable here. I have earned trust, respect, and position through proven loyalty and exemplary service by hunting those just like you. More importantly, however a broken bar, she stopped, facing them directly. I have shown that those from beyond the rift can be assets rather than liabilities, and I will not a broken bar allow any of you to jeopardize what I and others like me have built. Your foolishness will not undo our progress. Your inability to adapt will not paint the rest of us as security risks. Despite the threat in her words, her tone remained professional, almost conversational. It was the calm delivery that made it all the more chilling. Think of me as your guardian angel, she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I will advocate for those who prove themselves worthy. I will ensure those who are cooperative are rewarded with a comfortable lifestyle, and the excellent are elevated to a position where they can excel further. But I will also be the first to sign the termination orders for those who prove themselves irredeemable. She tapped the tablet against her palm in a rhythmic motion. You may view this as cruelty. It is not. It is pragmatism. The resources spent on one troublemaker could instead help three who genuinely wish to integrate. The security risk posed by one malcontent could endanger dozens who simply want to live in peace. I have worked too hard and sacrificed too much to allow anyone to threaten the position I've earned, she concluded, her voice carrying the weight of personal experience. So I suggest you all make your choices wisely. Cooperation brings comfort, excellence brings freedom, and defiance. She didn't need to finish. The armed guard's subtle shift in posture said everything that needed to be said. With that out of the way, Lysandra said, her tone shifting back to something more businesslike, let's discuss the practical matters of your transition into your new lives. Her expression shifted to a more administrative look as she tapped the tablet's screen once and nodded to the staff that had entered the gym while she was talking. Personnel hurried around as guards took positions in key locations, preparing to process those who accepted the offer of amnesty. Now, let me explain exactly what happens next. Lysandra's voice echoed clearly through the speakers. We will be collecting very detailed information from each of you to create comprehensive profiles. This is non-negotiable. She began listing on her fingers. We're going to need full name Issa, and I mean full names, including any titles, epithets, or clan designations. Your race and any subspecies variations. All affiliations are past and present. This includes your mercenary companies, guild memberships, noble houses you may have served, and any other organizations. As murmurs rippled through the crowd, Lysandra turned away from the microphone and spoke with a group of government agents, who wore vests marked with the FBI, HSI, and ICE logos. Their conversation continued for a few more minutes, giving the newly arrived refugees time to process what was happening and what they were getting into. But all of that brief window of breathing room ended when Lysandra turned back to the microphone. We will document what you did before becoming captives, and more importantly, what you did before coming to this world. Your original professions, skills, magical abilities, everything. Lysandra's authoritative voice boomed out of the speakers once again. Additionally, you will submit to biological information. For those unfamiliar with the term, it means we'll be recording your unique physical identifiers. You will also provide blood samples and undergo complete physical examinations. Confusion spread through the crowd when they learned that such extreme methods were being used just to identify them. There was real concern when it came to biological identifiers, especially regarding witches and warlocks. The last thing anyone wanted was to have a physical extension of themselves in the hands of a damn witch, but it seemed they didn't really have a choice. Noticing the looks from many in the crowd, Lysandra clarified, I know what you're all thinking, but I wouldn't worry. Fortunately, no one's going to put a curse on any of you, she said in an amused hum. Instead, physicians of this world's version of Helissa will conduct these examinations and collect identifiers. But let me be absolutely clear on this point. Her voice dropped into a soft, but very dangerous timbre. You are not, under any circumstances, to resist at any point in this process. Several of the more prideful beings shifted uncomfortably. An elf near the middle looked ready to object, but Lysandra cut off any protest before it could form. Any attempt at resistance will be interpreted as hostility. Lysandra gestured to the guards, who adjusted their grips on their weapons. "And I will have you neutralized immediately." "This is not a threat, it is a promise." "I have neither the time nor the patience for dramatics." Lysandra suddenly set the tablet on the podium and clasped her hands together, eliciting a thunderclap that was far louder than any of those otherworlder weapons. It reminded everyone, including the otherworlders themselves, that Lysandra was not just some demure corporate woman. It reminded everyone that she, too, was a mana user and an extremely potent one at that. "All right," she commanded, her voice brooking no argument. "Everyone stand up." Not wanting to cross her, the sound of hundreds of bodies rising filled the gymnasium, causing the metal bleachers to groan under the shifting weight. Some moved quickly, eager to comply. Others rose slowly, reluctantly, but they rose all the same. "Form a single file line," Lysandra continued. "Start from the front row and work your way back. Maintain arm's length spacing between each person." The logistics of organizing 300 beings of vastly different sizes and species into a single line created a moment of chaos. Goblins who had been sitting in front found themselves looking up at the towering orcs behind them, who grumbled as they tried to squeeze past elves without knocking them over. "I don't care if you have to duck, crouch, or stand on your tiptoes," Lysandra growled, watching the disorder with visible irritation. "Figure it out quickly." One of the human-looking beings with golden eyes raised a tentative hand. "What will happen to you, sir?" "No questions during processing," Lysandra interrupted. "Everything will be explained as you go through. Your only job right now is to form that line and follow instructions." The guards began moving along the edges of the crowd, using their presence to shepherd stragglers into place. They didn't touch Anya, they didn't need to. The implicit threat of those weapons was more than enough motivation. "Good," Lysandra said as the line finally began to take shape, snaking through the gymnasium in a ragged but functional formation. "Remember, do not be a problem for us to solve." She let the sentence hang, watching as the last few beings hurried to find their places in line. "Welcome to your new lives," she concluded, picking up her tablet again. "Let's begin." Lysandra's heels clicked against the asphalt as she left the gymnasium with her tablet snugly tucked under her arm. The federal liaisons and agency personnel trailing behind her were already dispersing to handle their own duties as Lysandra headed toward the parked convoy. Although Lysandra was an extremely exotic oddity, at this moment, she was just another part of the massive machine operating under an executive mandate. The high school they had occupied was now fully converted into a federal processing center. What used to be a parking lot for teachers, beaters and teenagers' first cars was now filled with black vehicles as sedans, SUVs, and heavily armored SWAT bearcats displaying the insignias of numerous three-letter agencies. FBI and HSI agents, wearing ballistic plates, gathered in small groups, some reviewing operations and procedures, while others coordinated on radios. But regardless of what any agent was doing, they didn't even glance at Lysandra as she confidently moved through the crowd. Whatever novelty once existed in working with an honest-to-God elf had completely worn off, especially when the hunt started and they all had to get into gear. Everyone had a role to play, and there was a mandate from the American people to get this new security crisis under control. Flatbed trucks rolled into the makeshift compound, hauling in temporary structures, housing units, mobile command centers, medical screening units, and what looked suspiciously like holding cells were being set up outside, where football and baseball fields were located. The entire operation had the controlled chaos of a well-oiled machine, with each component focused on its specific task. Lysandra marched toward a blacked-out GMC Suburban with an expression that grew more irritated with each step. As she approached, she found a group of agents huddled near the vehicle, deep in discussion over a phone showing what appeared to be a map with various red markers. A last sighting was 3 days ago in Knoxville, one was saying. If the pattern holds, they're moving east. Could be trying for the state line, another added. We should coordinate with the Tennessee Highway Patrol. As Lysandra reached for the door handle, she finally voiced her frustration. muttering under her breath. How does anyone tolerate this garbage? She sat down after flinging the door open and lifted one foot to glare at the offending heel. 3 inches of torture disguised as fashion. Being forced into this awful contraption in this world makes it somehow even more infuriating. One of the FBI agents saw a woman in her 40s with her hair in a practical bun and glanced over from her discussion. Rookie mistake, she said with an amused huff. Should have kept a pair of flats in your go bag. Jason, didn't we tell her that on day 1? The agent named Jason, still studying his phone, shrugged without lifting his eyes. We told her lots of things, Ashley. Ashley, the female agent, turned back to Lysandra with a look that was more assessment than sympathy. That's how it goes when the brass wants you at every dog and pony show. When the president has the full backing of the entire House and Senate, if he says jump, everyone asks how high. She then gestured at the circus around them with her coffee cup. Every local politician within 500 miles wants their photo op with the elf who's hunting her own kind. Governors, mayors, hell, I think the Nashville city controller tried to get a meeting yesterday. Tell me about it. Jason finally looked up with a sour expression. While you were inside doing your scary enforcer routine, I've been fielding calls from 3 different police chiefs who want to know why their departments aren't getting a bigger slice of the task force pie. As if we don't have enough egos to manage. A snort left Ashley's mouth as she took a swig of her coffee. At least the reframing is working. 6 months ago, these were alien invaders. Now they're just interdimensional fugitives and persons of interest. Makes our job easier when the public isn't screeching about an invasion every 5 minutes. The CIA's spin game is solid, I'll give you that, Jason added, rolling his shoulder and glancing at Lysandra tossing her heels in the back of the SUV. Though I still think former Night Hunt's Magical Criminals sounds like a bad TV show pitch. Lysandra yanked open the Suburban's door, tossing her tablet onto the seat. Is there a point to this commentary, or do you two just enjoy the sound of your own voices? Just saying, Ashley replied with a mischievous cackle when she heard Lysandra's tone. Next stop is Atlanta. City Council presentation at 2, Governor at 4. Maybe invest in some gel insoles. Or tell them to fuck off and send a video conference, Jason said with his own annoying smirk as he added to the conversation. We've got actual fugitives to catch. Speaking of which, Ramirez wants you to review the Atlanta files when you get a chance. That goblin crew hit another jewelry store. A groan that was audible even over the rumble of nearby vehicles starting up echoed out as Lysandra dipped her head. Same shit, different realm. She grumbled that strange earthling proverb while still massaging her aching foot. That set Jason and Ashley off like hyenas, their laughter echoing across the parking lot. Look at that. She's going native. Jason crowed, elbowing Ashley. Just under a year and she's already picking up our colorful expressions. Next thing you know, she'll be eating hot dogs at baseball games, Ashley added with an insufferable grin. Though I gotta say, goblin robbery crews are definitely new to us. Never thought I'd be reading that the suspect is 3 feet tall, green, and likes shiny things in an official report. Lysandra scoffed, shifting to massage her other foot. Please, nabbing shiny trinkets is a kobold thing. Plus, hunting down idiots this overt is easy. When I was a knight, I was tasked with tracking the nastiest pieces of trash to ever exist. She leaned back in the leather seat, her expression becoming distant. House Ithaca specifically retained me to hunt those freelancers or even bounty hunters refused to touch. Serial killers who used blood magic, trafficking rings that dealt in more than just bodies, and freelancer groups that turned to organized crime. It was one thing to run jobs for a syndicate, and something else entirely when all the children in a village disappeared. Plus, I had to deal with the underworld going too far and putting hits out on high-profile merchants or even nobles. Lysandra sighed as she reached for her boots in the back. The federal agents looked at Lysandra with a hint of interest. Those from the notorious agency the elf woman was from rarely shared anything about their personal lives or past. But then again, Lysandra wasn't your typical spook, and she wasn't even from this planet, so the agents were even more keen on listening. Well, here you have fancy tools like cameras, Jason said, his tone somewhere between mocking and impressed. Must be like cheating. The cameras help, Lysandra admitted. Though half of these fools who get caught up in doing something this stupid probably didn't take the time to learn what they even are. That goblin crew in Atlanta? They probably thought the cameras were decorative. But as she thought more on the criminal elements that snuck into this world, Lysandra's expression darkened and the levity drained from her voice. There are problem individuals still at large, though. Smart ones. They won't surface again unless they want to, and when they do. She trailed off, but both agents caught the implication. How bad are we talking? Ashley asked, her professional instincts kicking in. There's a warlock named Matthias Corrin who specializes in shapeshifting a devil magic that allows him to take any form and mimic any voice. Last I heard, he was hired with other freelancers in the expeditionary force. Lysandra's jaw tightened. Then there's Vera, a psychotic, disgusting demon of a person that needs to be purged with fire. Looks like an innocent petite woman, but she's got a body count higher than there are people in a town. Poisons, curses, ritual magic. She likes to play with her food. Jesus, Jason muttered. And those are just the ones I know by name, Lysandra continued. The really smart ones? They're probably already embedded. New identities, quiet lives, waiting. Maybe they'll stay that way forever, or maybe one day they'll decide they're tired of hiding. She looked directly at both agents. Your world has organized crime. Yes. Now imagine what someone with blood magic or devil magic could do if they got connected with the right Oronga people. Protection rackets backed by actual curses. Assassination via ritual magic that leaves no physical evidence. Drug operations enhanced by sorcery. You'll need your own warlocks and witches to even fight against it. And since you're just a loner, you won't be on this task force forever, Ashley said slowly, narrowing her eyes. Indeed. Lysandra pulled her heels back on with a grimace. I'm only here long enough to kickstart your investigations as a specialist. After that, I'll go back to whatever they decide I'm useful for. And you'll be left trying to hunt these animals with conventional methods. The two agents simply stood there with frustrated looks, knowing this was far from ideal. Several agents had stopped whatever they were doing and started discreetly listening in on the conversation. Everyone around seemed to share Ashley and Jason's unease when Lysandra mentioned these things. Abilities. This was far beyond the norm for any federal agent, but they were the first and last line of defense against these monsters. Well, fuck, Jason said succinctly, running a hand through his hair. So what the hell do we do about them then? Lysandra shrugged, a gesture that somehow managed to evoke a wave of absolute dread. You keep doing what we're doing now. Try to recruit talent that will enable you to counter these threats. Hopefully, you'll stumble across a witch or warlock willing to work with you, she explained, pulling out her phone and glancing at her messages. And hope the monsters let loose among the sheep make a mistake. She then glanced out the door toward the organized chaos of the processing center. Hell, maybe they'll take our offer and work for us directly instead of needing us to hunt them down, Lysandra added with a tone that made it clear she didn't believe that herself. The really dangerous bastards are broken bar everyone like Matthias and Vera, aren't exactly the type to take the offer, to be honest. They're predators who found themselves in a world full of prey that didn't even know magic existed a little under a year ago. That's not exactly reassuring, Ashley said dryly. It wasn't meant to be, Lysandra replied. Reality rarely is. An agent listening from a nearby vehicle pondered the implications of the criminal underground being able to shapeshift, and from how Lysandra explained things, it sounded like this piece of shit could change genders and voices. Dealing with something like that would be the absolute worst-case scenario. It was one thing for a vile serial killer to be capable of such a feat, but the nightmares that would spawn if organized crime or, God forbid, a terrorist organization could do the same mere broken bar, it would be catastrophic. Then there was the absolute nightmare of adversarial nation-states or non-state actors setting up shop and training agents en masse. The problems that would arise would be insurmountable. Speaking of predators, the agent listening inside, wanting not to think about that nightmare of a scenario, and suddenly spoke up. "What's your take on those smaller furred and scaled fuckers running around?" He waved his hand dismissively. "You know, the ones that have been burrowing and skulking about in alleyways and drainage systems or whatever." He leaned against the open SUV door after walking up. "How hard will it be to get rid of AM?" Lysandra fixed the man with a strange look and tilted her head slightly off to the side in thought. "Are you talking about the kobolds and scroungers that made their way here?" The agent snapped his fingers and pointed at her as if she'd just answered a game show question correctly. "Yep, those are the ones." A dark laugh escaped Lysandra's throat, the sound making several agents shift uncomfortably. "Ha! Yeah, you're not getting rid of those goddess damn things," she answered, invoking her new deity's name. Pure exasperation was plastered all over Lysandra's face as she shook her head. It was an expression that suggested this was a struggle that even her world was unable to deal with. "They populate faster than those wild swine you call hogs, and they can survive on eating little garbage. In my world, we tried everything to exterminate those vile things," she said, pointing a scolding finger at the agent. "Not to reduce the population, not to move them, exterminate." "We had kill-on-site bounties for freelancers, merchant guards or even hunters. Any idiot with something sharp and pointy could have collected money, even the local village hunter," Lysandra continued, as if she was genuinely upset. "We've tried everything. Hell, the Empire brought over specialized mages, the ones specialized in necromancy, to create a plague just for them, and it didn't even make a dent, only left festering, tainted corpses everywhere. Nothing worked." "You're kidding," Ashley said flatly. Pure, unfettered hatred flashed across Lysandra's face. "I wish I was," she growled, rubbing her temple as if the mere thought gave her a splitting headache. "No matter what you try, you're not getting rid of them. Kobolds are too smart, and scroungers adapt to everything. Hells, they even survive in deserts, active volcanoes, at the bottom of frozen lakes or even in the plagued lands. They're like cockroaches, but worse in every way." "So what the hell do we do?" the agent asked, looking increasingly disturbed. "The best you can do is try to somehow enlist the kobolds to work for you," Lysandra said, though her tone suggested she knew how absurd that sounded. "They're reasonably intelligent. Chaotic, yes. An absolute mess of a species, certainly. But they can be bargained with." She adjusted her seatbelt, preparing for the drive. "House Ithaca actually had a contract with several kobold warrens before we were purged. They handled waste management, minor construction, pest controller jobs no one else wanted. It worked. Mostly." "Mostly?" Jason prompted. A difficult look formed on Lysandra's face as she waved her hand dismissively. "Well, they also had a habit of collecting anything and everything that wasn't nailed down, starting territorial wars with each other in the alleys or culverts, and occasionally eating someone's pet." She grimaced. "But it was better than having them as active enemies." When the house fell and the contracts ended, she didn't need to finish. The agents could imagine what happened when suddenly unemployed kobolds were left to their own devices. "Even if you managed to integrate some of them," Lysandra continued, "there will always be rogue bands or entire warrens that need culling. They're too fractious as a species to ever fully unify. You'll be dealing with kobold problems for as long as your world exists." "And the scroungers?" someone called out. "Pray the kobolds' hatred of them puts them back on a warpath. They're the only ones good at and dedicated enough to hunt down and destroy them," Lysandra said seriously. "If they haven't already, the moment they decide humans are easier prey than dumpster diving, you'll have a real problem." "They're not intelligent like kobolds. They're just hungry, adaptable, and they breed like nothing you've ever seen." The assembled agents looked at each other with expressions ranging from disbelief to horror. "So we've got intelligent, bipedal lizards and magical, flesh-eating plague rats that both reproduce faster than we can kill them," Jason summarized. A huff of amusement escaped Lysandra's mouth as she shot her gaze toward Jason. "Don't forget that they can use tools, set traps, coordinate, and live in the most austere environments possible," Lysandra added. "Don't underestimate these things just because they're small." "A kobold clan with a grudge and knowledge of your infrastructure could cause more damage than any serial killer warlock could ever hope." "I really think I need a drink," Ashley muttered, pinching the bridge of her nose. Or to resign a broken bar. The elf couldn't help but offer a sinister smile. She truly enjoys seeing pure misery on the agents' faces. The taste of shared suffering is sweet to her because she felt the same when she first started her role as a knight and was given the lowest level task of eliminating these creatures, or more accurately, population control. It had been a horrible assignment that followed her even into her freelance life after House Ithaca fell. Exterminating scroungers and destroying rogue kobold warrens wasn't a task she had ever imagined would chase her across dimensions into this world a broken bar. Yet here she was. Now Lysandra was, in a completely different realm, only to face the same damned kleptomaniac pests and diseased vermin. The irony wasn't lost on her. At least, hopefully, she could pass the buck of this shit detail to someone else. Let these earthlings discover the joy of crawling through drainage systems after creatures that thrived on drinking sewage. Lysandra slipped the back of her heel onto her foot properly and ran a hand through her hair before letting out a heavy sigh. All right, let's go meet this council and governor or whatever. She settled back into the leather seat, already dreading the next several hours. The faster we get these meetings over with, the faster I can get back to hunting down Vera or, Goddess help me, Matthias. She pulled her feet fully into the SUV and arranged herself in the back seat before slamming the door shut. The thought of tracking actual dangerous criminals instead of playing politics was almost appealing, even if said criminals could literally curse her into oblivion. The agents around the vehicles let out heavy sighs as the weight of their new reality settled on their shoulders like lead blankets. They pushed themselves up from their various resting positions against car doors, hoods, or bumpers and started trudging to their own vehicles. Guess that's our cue, Jason muttered, tossing his now cold coffee into a nearby trash can. Just another day in post-Thrift America, Ashley replied, her tone indicating she had come to terms with their new reality. Finch's heart pounded in his chest like a machine gun firing non-stop as they moved slowly through the underground complex. His breathing was short, controlled bursts through his nose, as he tried to prevent himself from hyperventilating, even though his instincts were screaming at him to do so. Calling what they were in tunnels felt like a joke. What they found wasn't the crappy passageways carved out with pickaxes like in the Vietnam War, as he imagined. No, not this. Instead, Finch found himself in a fully developed, damn professionally engineered underground base illuminated with its own version of fluorescent light strips. The warm, steady glow never wavered even as explosions rocked the structure, sending chips of earth raining from the ceiling and onto Finch's head as he crept forward. He kept his rifle oriented toward one of the countless turns ahead as SEALs and Marine raiders stacked up outside several entryways. Each operator kept his weapon trained on a different angle possible as they inched around, trying to clear as much as they could before committing to an entry. All pretense of inter-service rivalry or even skill level was forgotten in the face of whatever in the hell they stumbled into. Everyone was mixed together now. Even Finch's boot ass was rubbing shoulders with SOCOM operators, and they all knew that a dynamic entry was basically a death sentence. No one wanted to run face first into some superpowered asshole with a pointy stick without filling the room with munitions first. However, it had become painfully clear that grenades, flashbangs, and other types of explosive ordnance they used were less effective than they had hoped, especially after losing the element of surprise, with U.S. forces ending up in a room-by-room fight. Without the advantage of range, the enemy became extremely dangerous, forcing them to move at an extraordinarily slow pace. This became even more true when the enemy introduced a new weapon, an incredibly effective version of grenades that didn't quite explode, but did things an actual grenade couldn't dream of. Finch breathed heavily as he and another SEAL moved further down the tunnel side by side to ensure security in the passageway. They carefully and slowly passed the operators covering the doorways, making sure everything was clear before proceeding. Then, down the bend, movement. There was absolutely no hesitation. Finch wasn't going to let whoever was peeking get a chance to do a damn thing as his fingers squeezed the trigger, letting loose 5 rounds in frantic succession. The suppressed but still powerful blasts erupted from his rifle, producing a strangely muffled ringing noise in the odd acoustics of the magical structure. "Contact front!" the lance corporal yelled, letting off 4 more shots at the shadowy figure disappearing around the corner. "Pushing up!" Ray's voice cut through the chaos. A hand struck Finch's shoulder, signaling him to move as he passed, while Rays and Newman squeezed past him and the seal through the crowd, still trying to settle their rooms. Finch immediately slid the butt of his rifle off his shoulder, raising the weapon into a high-ready stance to avoid flagging his fight team. Just as they moved past, Finch followed them before slamming his rifle back into position. Rays and Newman crept toward the elongated corner while Pham took up the rear. An entire squad of Marines from another platoon was behind them, but they kept their distance to prevent bunching up. This was standard practice among most modern militaries to avoid interfering with units that were already working, but the lesson became even more important in the New World. When every single combatant could cast spells or serve as an area of effect weapon and wipe out a squad, spacing was crucial. Finch and his fight team moved aggressively but carefully, training their weapons on the bend as they pressed toward the threat. Everything about their advance was nerve-wracking, and the men could have sworn it was deafening to the point where they could hear their hearts pounding if it weren't for the intense gunfire and explosions rocking the complex. But as they moved forward, the pointman, Rays, caught sight of something. The silhouetted edge of a person slowly peering around the corner, as if they were doing the same thing as them, except the very air itself looked odd. It was almost as if it was distorted like heat shimmer. "Pewter!" Rays screamed in a high-pitched shriek, making a split-second decision to shove himself into Newman, trying to get out of the way. In that split second, a shotgun blast of 12-inch earthen spikes violently showered the hall with devastating force, sending shards ricocheting around and embedding themselves in the walls where the Marines had been standing milliseconds before. Rays had shot past everyone and tumbled to the floor in an undignified heap, but Newman was already moving to cover the gap. The private brushed off Rays's desperate dive and committed to rounding the corner, his finger already squeezing the trigger before he even saw what just did that. The suppressed rifle chattered as he peppered the bend with gunfire, the principle of violence of action in full effect. Newman kept moving as he rounded the corner, his rifle chattering away until he felt and heard that iconic click when he pulled the trigger one last time. "Reloading!" he yelled, dropping to a knee with the absolute faith that his team was hot on his ass. Just as expected, Finch surged forward with his weapon already raised and firing down the tunnel. He finished rounding the bend just in time to see one figure sprinting full tilt and hit them square inches the back. The figure stumbled forward with a muffled cry, but before they hit the ground, someone grabbed them and yanked them around another bend before Finch could put another volley into them. Finch didn't stop shooting. He kept his rifle aimed at the spot where they ducked in, but his shots became slower and more deliberate. These controlled single shots conveyed the message that they should keep their heads down rather than engage in frantic suppressive fire. Every few rounds, he'd fire one just past the corner on the opposite side, letting anyone know that sticking their head out meant eating lead. By this time, Newman had finished slapping a new magazine into his weapon and sending the bolt forward. His weapon rocked back into his shoulder as he peered back around to get another rifle in the action. Meanwhile, Pham was in a half-state of panic with an enormous adrenaline dump flowing through him. The boot was quickly and roughly patting down Ray's body with shaking hands to check the wounds, his eyes flickering vigorously between the latest magical attack and his team leader. Newman, however, was cool as a cucumber, with a look of intense focus on his face as he and Finch fired off several more rounds at a few figures that made their presence known down the hall. Rays, on the other hand, was in the same boat as Pham and was thoroughly freaked out after nearly being turned into a pincushion. His own hands frantically checked his body, slapping away Pham's hands while he let out a series of expletives and slurs in Spanish. "Benjos, man, I'm kill all of AM," he groaned, shaking his head. This place was a death trap, and they were rats in a maze designed by sadistic wizards, but the Marines weren't one to take a damn thing lying down. "I got something for you, fuckface," Finch announced with a hateful sneer. "Newman, keep eyes on." "Yep, I got you," Newman replied, smoothly adjusting his weapon to a more comfortable position and shifting his body slightly to get a better sight line. Finch let his rifle hang at his chest as his hands quickly slid down to grab his M320 grenade launcher from its holster. He raised it, flipped off the safety, and aimed carefully to avoid hitting the ceiling or walls, because the tunnel wasn't quite straight. These bastards had built it with slight curves and sharp turns everywhere. There were almost no straight corridors, and each room was arranged so that it was easier for melee users to close the distance or give a spellcaster time to cast something before someone rounded the corner. The bastards probably designed and planned this place for this exact scenario. A broken bar, but Finch had gotten pretty good at lobbing 40mm presence around corners. A moment later, the distinctive sound of a 40mm tomb echoed through the tunnel as the projectile arced perfectly down the frame of the only visible doorway. The explosion that occurred when it landed squarely inside the room wasn't quite earth-shattering, but the concussive blast was amplified almost tenfold due to the confined space. It was powerful enough to make Finch wince and his brain tingle, even though he was a soldier 30 meters away. However, to be fair, that it was just barely out of the munitions arming distance. Finch's hands were already moving as he flipped open the tube, dropped the spent casing, and slid a new 40mm round into place. He kept the launcher raised and ready, daring some other dumb piece of shit to pop out so he could deliver a very special surprise, while Newman kept his rifle trained on the same target. It took a few moments for Reyes to finally realize he was completely unharmed. However, he was still so freaked out that he kept patting down his gear as if he couldn't quite believe he didn't have some huge spike sticking out of him. After calming down, Reyes let loose a series of Spanish curses, shrugged off Fam's hands, and started checking his weapon, and stomped towards his fight team. Fam, on the other hand, seemed utterly lost. He wasn't quite sure what he was supposed to be doing or where he should position himself in this kind of situation. It would have been one thing if they were up against a conventional enemy that used modern, conventional weapons, but how was he supposed to react to contact when the contact was supernatural? The boot's eyes darted between his team leader and the ongoing firefight, before awkwardly shuffling back into the stack behind Reyes. "Hey, you boys alright?" The Marine squad leader from further down the tunnel suddenly shouted. "You need a corpsman." Another burst of gunfire rang out as Reyes peeked around the corner to get a little revenge. "Nah, we're good," he shouted back, with a hint of bitterness in his voice. "We're gonna need help taking this corner, though." Reyes then slapped Finch's shoulder and pointed at a specific doorway. It didn't take long before another tomb followed, seconds later, by a thunderous explosion that shook dust from the ceiling. "Roger that," the Marine squad leader yelled back with an amused huff. He was glad to see the very essence of the Corps hadn't faded, even with the fresh blood flooding in and the young bucks driven by spite and hatred, just like every Marine before them. "Gonna have to wait a minute. Hey, we're moving up to support, but we gotta let these squids and raiders work first." Reyes glanced over his shoulder at the coordinated chaos unfolding behind them. A team of Marine raiders was positioned and stacked outside an entryway, each man holding their assigned angle, waiting for anyone foolish enough to make themselves known. From how each of the operators was positioned and where their weapons were pointed, it was clear there were multiple threat areas that hadn't been visible deeper within. 2 Marines were posted on either side of the door with weapons trained on opposite corners, while 2 others aimed inside at what must have been additional doorways. One of the raiders, positioned to see most of the room, raised his hand and made a flashing motion by repeatedly opening and closing his fist. Then, he instantly straightened his hand into a knife edge and moved it smoothly forward and upward in the direction he intended. The raider behind him dropped his weapon, letting it hang from its sling before dropping to a knee, while another on the opposite side mirrored the movement. Both pulled grenades at the same time, and as if perfectly synchronized, they pulled the pins, leaned in, and threw the grenades toward the corners they couldn't see, parts of the room where defenders would be waiting if they were there. On the opposite side of the tunnel, SEALs carried out their own version of the same drill at another doorway, suggesting that both teams were coordinating their assault to strike simultaneously. 4 powerful yet muffled blasts erupted almost at the same time. The explosions blended into a single, deafening roar as operators threw themselves inside, using all the speed and force of action they could muster. The first two to get through each door followed the path of least resistance, flowing inside like water to their key points of control, hitting critical corners where they could dominate the room. What followed was an absolute flurry of gunfire that erupted from both the raiders and the SEALs' sides of the tunnel. The loud, angry snaps and hisses of suppressed weapons created a strange popcorn-like cacophony that echoed through the tunnels. Without missing a beat, the Marine squad providing overwatch quickly moved to cover the entryways, giving the operators space to work. Marines moved past like a well-oiled machine toward Reyes and his fight team, while the squad leader marched forward vigorously, thrusting his arm at his Marines. It was time for the Marines to get to work. "I want fire superiority down these halls," the squad's sergeant bellowed as he smacked one of his men on the shoulder and pointed at Reyes' fire team. "Pratt, get the 240s up and walk the bitch into position." The second squad moved into action like a well-rehearsed ballet of violence. One fire team quickly swapped places with another, advanced, and brought the vaunted M240B medium machine gun to the front. The poor soul hauling 30 pounds of belt-fed democracy had a cruel grin on his face at the chance to finally unleash the infernal weapon and hopefully lighten the load on the humpback. "Get that pig set up there," the grizzled sergeant barked, pointing to a spot just short of the corner's edge. The machine gun team dropped to the deck immediately. The gunner went prone, while his assistant gunner flopped down beside him, already pulling extra belts of 7.62 mm from the assault pack. They set up just out of view of whatever was around that corner and deployed the bipod legs on the tunnel floor. Finch quickly holstered his M320 and went back to his M27. Remembering he blew his load earlier, the lance corporal dropped his magazine, slipped it into his dump pouch, and slapped a new one into his rifle before giving Newman a quick nod. They'd done this dance before, not in magical tunnels, maybe, but the principle was still the same. On three, Reyes hissed. 1, 2. Finch, Newman, and even Pham emerged as one firing line, letting their rifles bark in unison. As soon as they exposed themselves, they spotted a group of enemies stacking up. The coordinated fire wasn't meant to kill, just to keep heads down while the real action got into position. Brass casings pinged off the walls as they dumped rounds downrange, creating a wall of lead that would make anyone think twice about poking their head out. Imperials downrange weren't fools. A kaleidoscope of colors exploded in front of the group of warriors and mages as ice walls, earthen barriers, and magical shields erupted ahead of them. But as they slowly started to advance, continuously creating barriers in front of themselves, they couldn't see the trap being set just behind the Marines providing suppressive fire. The machine gun team used the covering fire perfectly. The gunner and the assistant gunner scooted sideways on their bellies, dragging the heavy weapon into position. Once in position, the assistant gunner slapped the gunner's helm to the universal signal for good to go. "Set." The gunner yelled. Finch and his team immediately ducked back into cover, pressing themselves against the wall just as "Get some." The machine gunner just before yanking back on the trigger. The unsuppressed M240B opened up with an absolutely deafening roar that made everything before it sound like a whisper. The entire tunnel became a symphony of violence as the machine gun lit up the dim passageway with consecutive muzzle flashes, each burst creating a miniature sun that threw wild shadows on the walls. Yeah, that's right, get some." The gunner screamed over the apocalyptic noise, his whole body vibrating with the weapon's recoil. The belt fed through the weapon in a blur of brass and links. Each round slammed into the magical assortment violently and let loose strange noises that reverberated through the tunnels. Sparks flew as bullets met the supernatural, sending ricochets winning off everywhere like angry hornets. The gunner let off an even longer string, the barrel starting to glow cherry red. "Get some, motherfucker. I'm coming for that ass." A horrible yet strange cacophony engulfed the entire tunnel, making any kind of conversation impossible, but the machine gunner didn't let up the pressure. He kept his finger on the trigger, centered around one specific spot, and watched it get weaker and weaker with each bullet. Behind the shield bearer, Shadows moved, even more enemies stacking up, waiting for the gun to run dry or overheat. But the A-gunner was already prepping the next belt, ready to keep this storm of hate going as long as necessary. The magic shields gradually weakened as the machine gunner unleashed destruction. He could see the frantic movement behind the failing spells as he fired one concentrated burst after another, targeting a single spot like a jackhammer working concrete. But then came the sound no gunner really wanted to hear: resounded the dreaded click. Reloading. The gunner yelled, but the assistant gunner was already on point with another belt. Flipping open the feed tray cover and brushing out the broken links, the gunner slaps in a fresh belt like a speed demon. The whole process is smooth as butter, months of training condensed into seconds of muscle memory without a single slip-up. Mainly because one slip-up meant a horde of angry magical bastards would descend on them like an avalanche. To cover for the downtime, Reyes and his fight team immediately popped back out with their rifles already barking as they picked up the slack. Their suppressive fire wasn't as overwhelming as the pig, but it was enough to keep heads down while the machine gun got back in action. Set. The gunner yelled. Reyes and his team peeled back into cover just as the gunner got back on the trigger. But this time, something was different. The magical barriers that had been absorbing their fire were failing. The ice walls shattering, the earthen shields crumbling, the glowing magical constructs flickering out like dying light bulbs. Then the gunner saw what was behind them, and his eyes widened. Some massive son of a bitch stepped out of the smoky, magical haze of disappearing shields, wielding what looked like a dam bank vault door. The thick metal slab was so enormous, it could have been wide enough to cover most of the tunnel when he aimed it at the Marines. It wasn't just a shield, it was a portable wall, and whoever carried it moved with it as if it weighed nothing. Panic flooded the gunner as his finger found the trigger again. Metal against metal created a deafening clash that made teeth ache and eardrums threatened to burst, as the gunner desperately searched for any gap or weakness, directing his fire around the edges of the metal slab. Sparks flew in every direction, and bullets ricocheted everywhere, including toward the Marine gunner, yet he kept his finger pressed firmly on the trigger. The impacts created a haze of hot metal shavings, and Gunsmoke made the muzzle flashes look like lightning in a storm cloud, but the shield kept coming,